The cold had stopped hurting an hour ago. That was how Ilara knew she was dying. She curled tighter against the stone wall of the castle, her thin dress offering nothing against the winter wind. Snow had soaked through the fabric hours ago, and now ice crystals clung to her eyelashes, her lips, the tips of her fingers that had long since gone numb. This is how it ends, she thought, frozen to death outside the Lycan king's castle like a stray dog. It was almost funny. Almost. She was 22 years old, an Omega of the lowest rank, and she had been sent here as a gift, a peace offering from her pack to the most powerful Lycan king in the Northern Territories. Her alpha had wrapped her in chains and presented her like livestock, promising that she was obedient, quiet, and knew her place. The Lycan king had been traveling when she arrived. His steward had looked at her with undisguised contempt. "Another Omega," the man had sneered. "Put her in the servants' quarters. She can scrub floors until His Majesty decides what to do with her." That had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of endless labor, of sleeping on a thin mat in a freezing room, of being fed scraps that even the kitchen dogs rejected. Ilara had endured it all without complaint. She was used to being invisible, used to being nothing. But tonight, she had made a mistake. One of the higher-ranking servants, a beta woman named Marta, had accused her of stealing food from the pantry. Ilara hadn't stolen anything. She had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Marta needed someone to blame for the missing supplies she herself had taken. The punishment was immediate. "Lock her outside," Marta had ordered. "Let her freeze until she learns her place." The other servants had dragged Ilara through the castle and thrown her out into the snow. The door had slammed shut behind her, and she had heard the bolt slide into place. That was 6 hours ago. Now, as midnight approached, Ilara could no longer feel her body. Her heartbeat had slowed to a sluggish rhythm. Her thoughts were becoming scattered, dreamlike. She knew what hypothermia felt like. She had nearly died from it once before, when her own pack had left her outside as punishment for dropping a dish. At least this time, she thought dimly, no one will beat me when I wake up, because I won't wake up. The thought brought a strange peace. No more pain, no more cruelty, no more being treated like something less than human. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't feel the warmth that spilled out into the frozen night, or the heavy footsteps that crunched through the snow toward her crumpled form. But she did feel the hands that lifted her, large, impossibly warm, gentle despite their strength. "What in the—" A voice, deep and rough with shock. "She's half frozen. How long has she been out here?" Ilara tried to open her eyes, but her lids were too heavy. She tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't move. All she could do was hang limply in those warm arms, barely conscious, waiting for whatever came next. Another beating, she thought. They'll punish me for being found. But the beating didn't come. Instead, she felt herself being carried. The cold disappeared, replaced by blessed warmth. She heard voices, alarmed, urgent, and then she was being lowered onto something soft. Blankets, furs, heat. "Get the healer? Now!" That voice again, commanding, powerful, the kind of voice that expected instant obedience and received it. Ilara forced her eyes open and found herself staring into the face of the most terrifying man she had ever seen. He was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the firelight behind him. His hair was black as midnight, streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of molten gold. A scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw, giving his already harsh features a brutal edge. The Lycan King. She knew him instantly, even though she had never seen him before. Power radiated from him like heat from a flame, and his presence filled the room until there was space for nothing else. Ilara's heart seized with terror. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to." She didn't even know what she was apologizing for. For being found? For not dying quietly enough? For daring to exist in his presence? The Lycan King's golden eyes narrowed. "Who put you outside?" Ilara flinched at the sharpness in his tone. I deserved it. I was being punished." "For what?" "Stealing." The lie tasted bitter on her frozen lips. "I stole food from the pantry." Something shifted in the king's expression. His nostrils flared, and his jaw tightened. "You're lying." Of course he could tell. Lycans could smell deception as easily as humans could smell smoke. Ilara closed her eyes, waiting for his anger. "Little Omega." His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. "Look at me." She forced herself to obey. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes, the tension in his jaw, the barely contained fury that simmered beneath his surface. But the fury wasn't directed at her. "Who put you outside?" It wasn't a question. It was a command, spoken in a voice that demanded truth. "Marta," Ilara whispered. "The head housekeeper. She said I stole, but I didn't. I swear I didn't. I would never." "I know." The words cut through her panic like a blade. "I know you didn't steal. I can smell the truth on you." He straightened, and his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "I can also smell that you haven't been fed properly in weeks, that you've been sleeping somewhere freezing, that you've been worked until your hands bled." Ilara stared at him, uncomprehending. He could tell all of that just from her scent. "You were sent here as a gift," he continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "By the Blackwood Alpha." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And my household has been treating you like this since you arrived." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "It's fine. I'm used to it. I'm just an Omega. I don't expect—" "Stop!" The word was sharp enough to silence her instantly. The Lycan King's eyes blazed with something she couldn't identify. "You will not speak of yourself that way. Not in my presence. Not ever." Ilara's breath caught. She had expected anger, punishment, dismissal. She had expected to be thrown back out into the snow once he realized how worthless she was. She had not expected this. The king turned away from her, his massive frame rigid with barely contained rage. "Someone bring me Marta. Now." Ilara watched him, her frozen mind struggling to process what was happening. This was the Lycan King, the most feared ruler in the Northern Territories, a man who had conquered kingdoms and destroyed armies. And he was angry, not at her, but for her. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. She was just an Omega. She was nothing. Why did he look at her like she was something worth protecting? Ilara must have lost consciousness again, because when she next opened her eyes, the room had changed. She was no longer on the floor by the fire. She was in a bed, an enormous bed, piled high with furs and blankets that cocooned her in warmth. The sheets were soft against her skin, softer than anything she had ever felt, and the pillow beneath her head smelled of pine and wood smoke. For a moment, she simply lay there, too stunned to move. Then memory returned, and she bolted upright. The Lycan King, the snow, Marta. Easy? A deep voice came from somewhere to her left. You're safe. Ilara's head whipped toward the sound. The king sat in a chair by the window, his massive frame somehow folded into a piece of furniture that looked far too small for him. Firelight played across his scarred features, casting shadows that made him look even more dangerous than before. He had been watching her sleep. Your Majesty. She tried to scramble out of the bed, to kneel, to show proper respect, but her limbs wouldn't cooperate. Her body was still weak, still recovering from hours of freezing. Stay where you are. It was a command, but his voice was gentler than before. The healer said you need rest. You nearly died. Ilara stilled, her heart pounding. I'm sorry. For what? For being a burden. For causing trouble. I should have... You should have what? The king's golden eyes pinned her in place. Died quietly in the snow so no one would be inconvenienced? The words hit like a slap. Ilara flinched, but she couldn't deny the truth of them. That was exactly what she had been thinking in those final moments before he found her. That her death would be easier for everyone. The king's jaw tightened. Marta has been dismissed from my service. Permanently. Ilara's breath caught. What? She confessed to everything. The false accusation. The theft she blamed on you. The order to lock you outside. His voice was cold, precise, deadly. She has been escorted from the castle grounds. If she ever returns, she will be executed. But... Ilara's mind reeled. But she's been here for years. She's the head housekeeper. You can't just... I can do whatever I want. The words were simple, absolute. I am the king, and I do not tolerate cruelty toward those under my protection. Those under my protection. Ilara stared at him, uncomprehending. I'm not under your protection. I'm just an Omega, a gift from the Blackwood Pack. I'm nothing. Something flickered in the king's eyes, something that looked almost like pain. He rose from his chair and crossed the room toward her, each step deliberate, controlled. When he reached the bed, he didn't sit. He knelt. The Lycan king knelt beside her bed, bringing his face level with hers. What is your name? He asked quietly. Ilara. Ilara. He said it like he was tasting the word, learning its shape. I am Kyle, and you are not nothing. You were never nothing. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was something precious, something worth kneeling for. I don't understand, she whispered. Why do you care what happens to me? Kyle was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. When I opened that door tonight, I wasn't looking for anything. I couldn't sleep, so I was walking the halls, and then I smelled something. Smelled something? You. His golden eyes held hers, unflinching. Your scent hit me like a blade to the chest. I followed it outside, and I found you dying in the snow, and something inside me. He paused, as if searching for words. Something inside me broke. Ilara's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. I don't. You're my mate, Ilara. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and undeniable. That can't be right. she heard herself say. I'm an Omega, the lowest rank. You're a king. You're... I'm yours. Kale's voice was steady, certain. And you're mine. That's how the mate bond works. It doesn't care about rank or status or what others think you're worth. It simply is. Ilara shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. You don't want me. You can't want me. I'm broken. I'm... You're not broken. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with devastating gentleness. You're a survivor. There's a difference. A sob escaped her throat. She couldn't help it. Years of pain, of neglect, of being told she was worthless. And now this man, this king, was kneeling beside her bed and telling her she mattered. It was too much. It couldn't be real. I know you don't believe me, Kyle said quietly. I know you've been taught that you don't deserve kindness, that you don't deserve care. But I'm going to prove you wrong, Ilara, however long it takes. Why? The question came out broken, desperate. Why would you bother? Because you're worth it. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Because you've always been worth it. And I'm going to spend however long it takes showing you that. He rose to his feet, and for a moment, Ilara thought he was going to leave. Instead, he crossed to a table by the window and returned with a tray. The healer said you need to eat, slowly, so your body can adjust. He set the tray on the bed beside her. Warm bread, rich soup, sliced fruit, more food than she had seen in weeks. Ilara stared at it, then at him. This is for me? This is for you. He settled back into his chair, watching her with those golden eyes. Eat. Rest. Tomorrow, I'll have proper quarters prepared for you. Warm ones, with a real bed and a fire that's always lit. I can't accept... You can. His voice brooked no argument. You will. This is not charity, Ilara. This is what you deserve. What you've always deserved. She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers. The soup was warm and savory, and the first bite made her want to weep. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten something that wasn't cold scraps or stale bread. Kyle watched her eat in silence. There was no impatience in his expression, no expectation. He simply sat there, a king keeping vigil over a half-frozen Omega like she was the most important thing in the world. When she had finished half the soup, exhaustion began to pull at her again. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she fought to keep them open. Sleep, Kyle said softly. I'll be here when you wake. You don't have to stay. I know. He didn't move. Sleep, Ilara. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that none of this made sense, that he would change his mind once he realized how truly worthless she was, that kindness like this always came with a price. But she was so tired, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. She closed her eyes. And somewhere in the space between waking and sleep, she felt something shift inside her chest. Something small and fragile and terrifying. Something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 days passed. 3 days of warm rooms and soft beds. 3 days of meals that arrived on silver trays, brought by servants who bowed their heads and called her "my lady." 3 days of Kyle appearing at her door each morning to check on her recovery, his golden eyes scanning her face like he was memorizing every detail. Ilara kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. On the 4th night, she woke, screaming. The nightmare had been vivid, visceral, her old Alpha's face looming over her, his boot connecting with her ribs, the sound of her own bones cracking, the cold of the punishment cellar where they had left her for 3 days without food or water when she was 16. She was still screaming when the door burst open. Cale crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't touch her, just knelt beside the bed, his hands raised where she could see them, his voice low and steady. "Ilara, you're safe. You're in my castle. No one is going to hurt you." She couldn't breathe. Her chest was too tight, her lungs refusing to work. The room was spinning, and she could still feel phantom hands on her throat, still hear the Alpha's voice telling her she was worthless, useless, a waste of space. "Look at me." Cale's voice cut through the panic. "Ilara, look at me." She forced her eyes to focus on his face. Golden eyes, scarred features. The Lycan king, kneeling beside her bed in nothing but sleeping trousers, his chest bare, his expression tight with concern. "Breathe with me," he said. "In, out, slowly." She tried to match his rhythm. In, out, in, out. Gradually, the tightness in her chest began to ease. The room stopped spinning. The phantom hands released their grip. "There you go?" Kyle's voice was impossibly gentle. "That's it. You're safe." "I'm sorry." The words came out ragged, broken. "I didn't mean to wake you. I'll be fine. You should go back to—" "Don't." He cut her off, but there was no anger in his tone, only something that sounded like grief. "Don't apologize for having nightmares. And don't tell me to leave." Ilara stared at him. In the dim firelight, he looked different than he did during the day. Softer, somehow. More human. The scar on his face stood out starkly against his skin, and she found herself wondering how he had gotten it. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. She shook her head automatically, then stopped, swallowed. "My old Alpha," she heard herself say. "He used to, when I did something wrong, or when he was just in a bad mood, he would—" She couldn't finish. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. "You don't have to tell me," Kyle said quietly. "Not tonight. Not ever, if you don't want to." But something inside her had cracked open, and suddenly she couldn't stop the words from spilling out. "I was born an Omega, the lowest rank. My parents gave me to the pack when I was 5 because they couldn't afford another mouth to feed. The Alpha took me in as a servant." She laughed bitterly. That's what they called it, being taken in, like it was a kindness. Kyle didn't speak. He just listened, his golden eyes never leaving her face. "I learned quickly that I had to be invisible. If I was seen, I was punished. If I made a sound, I was punished. If I existed too loudly, I was punished." Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the blankets to still them. "When I was 16, I dropped a dish. Just a dish. It slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. The Alpha beat me until I couldn't walk, and then he locked me in the cellar for 3 days." A low sound escaped Cale's throat, almost a growl. "When I turned 18, he started looking at me differently." Ilara's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said an Omega's only value was in her body, that I should be grateful anyone wanted me at all. He never actually—" She swallowed hard. "He never went that far, but he made it clear that it was only a matter of time." "That's why they sent you here," Kyle said. His voice was rough, barely controlled. "To get you away from him." "No." Ilara shook her head. "They sent me here because I embarrassed him. A visiting Alpha from another pack saw me and offered to buy me. My Alpha refused. Not because he wanted to protect me, but because he didn't want anyone else to have what was his. The visiting alpha took offense. There was a fight. My alpha needed to make peace with your territory, and he needed to get rid of me at the same time. She met Kale's eyes. Sending me here solved both problems. Silence stretched between them. Then Kyle moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and his fingers engulfed hers completely. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it. Really hear it." Ilara nodded, not trusting her voice. "What they did to you was monstrous. All of it. The beatings, the starvation, the way they made you believe you were worthless." His grip tightened on her hand. "But they were wrong, Ilara. They were so wrong. You are not worthless. You are not invisible. You are not something to be used and discarded." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She couldn't stop them. "You are brave," Kyle continued, his voice fierce. "You survived things that would have broken anyone else. You kept going when every part of your world told you to give up. That's not weakness. That's strength." "I don't feel strong," she whispered. "I know." He lifted his free hand and brushed the tears from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was achingly tender. "But you are. And one day, you'll believe it too." She looked at him then, really looked at him, at the scar that marked his face, at the silver in his hair, at the weight in his golden eyes that spoke of centuries of loneliness, of battles fought and losses endured. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. "The scar. How did you get it?" Kale's expression flickered. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "My father," he said finally. "When I was young, he thought I was too soft to rule. He wanted to teach me that kindness was weakness." A bitter smile crossed his face. "He was wrong about that too." Ilara's heart clenched. This powerful king, this feared ruler, he had been hurt too. He understood. "We're both survivors," she said quietly. "Yes." Kale's thumb traced a gentle line across her knuckles. "We are." The air between them shifted. Ilara became acutely aware of how close he was, of the warmth radiating from his bare skin, of the way his eyes had darkened to molten amber. He leaned closer. Her breath caught. "I want to kiss you," he murmured. "But not tonight. Not when you're hurting. When I kiss you for the first time, I want you to be certain. I want you to want it as much as I do." Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. "And if I'm never certain, then I'll wait forever." He pressed his lips to her forehead, a soft, lingering kiss that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Get some sleep, little Omega. I'll be right here." He settled into the chair beside her bed, just as he had that first night, and Ilara lay back against the pillows, her hand still clasped in his, her heart full of something she was terrified to name. She was falling for him. She knew it with sudden, devastating clarity, and she had no idea what to do about it. 1 week later, the Blackwood Alpha came to take her back. Ilara was in the castle library when she heard the commotion. Kyle had given her free rein of the entire castle, and she had discovered a love of books that years of servitude had never allowed her to explore. She was curled in a window seat, a volume of poetry in her lap, when the doors burst open and a servant rushed in. "My lady!" The young man was pale, breathless. "The king requests your presence in the great hall, immediately." Something in his tone made her blood run cold. What's happened? The servant hesitated. Alpha Blackwood has arrived. He's demanding the return of his property. His property. The book slipped from Ilara's fingers. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The old terror came rushing back. The fear she had lived with for 17 years, the fear she thought she had finally escaped. He had come for her. He had actually come for her. My lady? The servant's voice seemed to come from very far away. The king is waiting. Ilara forced herself to stand, forced her legs to carry her through the castle corridors, down the sweeping staircase, toward the great hall where her past waited to drag her back into darkness. The doors were already open when she arrived. The great hall was packed with courtiers and guards, all of them watching the confrontation unfolding at its center. Kyle stood on the raised dais where his throne sat, his massive frame rigid with barely contained fury, and before him, flanked by a dozen of his own warriors, stood Alpha Blackwood. He looked exactly as Ilara remembered. Tall, broad, with cold blue eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth. The sight of him made her stomach lurch with nausea. There she is! Blackwood's voice echoed through the hall as she entered. His lips curved into a smile that made her skin crawl. My little Omega, I've come to take you home. Ilara froze in the doorway. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself invisible the way she had learned to do since childhood. But then Kale's eyes found hers across the crowded hall. And in that golden gaze, she saw something she had never seen before. Not pity, not possession, just steady, unwavering faith. You're strong, his eyes seemed to say. You can do this. Ilara lifted her chin and walked into the hall. She is not yours to take. Kale's voice was ice and steel. She was sent here as a gift. She belongs to this territory now. Blackwood laughed. A gift? She was sent as an insult. A worthless Omega to satisfy a debt. I've changed my mind. I want her back. No. The single word rang through the hall like a death knell. Kale descended from the dais, each step deliberate, predatory. When he reached Blackwood, he towered over the other alpha by nearly a foot. She stays, Kale said quietly. And if you ever set foot in my territory again, I will tear out your throat with my bare hands. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. She's mine. I raised her. I fed her. You starved her. Kale's voice dropped to a growl. You beat her. You locked her in a cellar for 3 days when she was 16 years old. You made her believe she was worthless. He leaned closer, and his eyes blazed with golden fire. I know everything, Blackwood. Everything you did to her. And if I had my way, you would already be dead. The hall had gone completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the two alphas, waiting to see who would back down first. Blackwood's gaze darted to Ilara. Is this true? You told him lies about me. They're not lies. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Everything he said is true. You know it is. You ungrateful little... Blackwood took a step toward her. He never finished the sentence. Kyle moved faster than Ilara's eyes could follow. One moment, Blackwood was advancing. The next, he was on his knees. Kyle's hand wrapped around his throat, his face turning purple from lack of air. Give me a reason, Kyle snarled. Give me one reason to end you right here. Kale. Ilara's voice cut through the tension. Stop. He looked at her, his eyes still blazing with rage. He deserves to die for what he did to you. I know, She walked toward him slowly, her heart pounding. But I don't want his blood on your hands. I don't want him to have any more power over either of us. For a long moment, Kyle didn't move. Then, slowly, he released Blackwood's throat. The Alpha collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "Get out," Kale said coldly. "Take your warriors and leave my territory. If I ever see you again, I will kill you. That is not a threat. It is a promise." Blackwood staggered to his feet, his face twisted with humiliation and fury. His eyes found Ilara one last time. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away." Ilara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without fear. He was just a man, a cruel, pathetic man who had made himself feel powerful by hurting someone weaker than him. "No," she said quietly, "I won't." Blackwood's face contorted. For a moment, she thought he might attack her anyway, consequences be damned. But then his gaze flicked to Kale, to the barely leashed violence in the king's stance, and whatever he saw there made him think better of it. He turned and stormed out of the hall, his warriors following behind him. The doors slammed shut. Silence. Then Kyle was in front of her, his hands cupping her face, his golden eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. "Are you all right?" His voice was rough, shaking. "Did he hurt you? Did he—" "I'm fine." She reached up and covered his hands with hers. "Kale, I'm fine. I should have killed him." The words came out ragged. "I should have—" "You did exactly what I needed you to do." She rose up on her toes, bringing her face closer to his. "You believed me. You defended me. You let me face him on my own terms." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "Ilara, I choose you." The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I choose this. I choose us. I don't know if I deserve you, but I'm done running. I'm done being afraid." Kyle made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a growl. "Say it again." "I choose you." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was consuming, overwhelming, a claiming and a promise all at once. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her off her feet, and she melted into him like she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. When they finally broke apart, the entire hall was staring at them. Ilara felt heat flood her cheeks, but Kyle just smiled. A real smile, the first she had ever seen on his scarred face. "Let it be known," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the great hall, "that this woman is my mate, my queen. Anyone who harms her answers to me." And for the first time in her life, Ilara didn't feel worthless. She felt chosen. The wedding took place 3 weeks later. Ilara stood before the mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The gown was silver and white, embroidered with delicate patterns of frost and moonlight. Her dark hair had been woven with tiny crystals that caught the light like stars. She looked like a queen. She felt like a fraud. "You're thinking too loudly." Kale's voice came from the doorway. She turned to find him leaning against the frame, dressed in ceremonial black, his golden eyes drinking her in like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," she said. "It's bad luck." "I don't believe in luck." He crossed the room and stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I believe in fate. And fate brought you to my door, half frozen and barely alive, and gave me the greatest gift I've ever received." Her eyes burned with tears. Kale, tell me what you're thinking. He cupped her face in his hands, tilting it up to meet his gaze. Tell me what's making you look so afraid. She swallowed hard. What if they're right? The courtiers, the nobles. I've heard them whispering. They think you're making a mistake. They think an Omega isn't fit to be queen. Let them whisper. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Their opinions mean nothing to me. You are my mate, my equal, my heart. And anyone who cannot see your worth is a fool. But I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know the politics, the etiquette, the... You'll learn. He pressed his forehead to hers. And I'll be right beside you, every step of the way. We're partners, Ilara. Whatever comes, we face it together. She closed her eyes and breathed him in. Pine and wood smoke, and something wild underneath. The scent of her mate, her king, her home. I love you, she whispered. The words came easier now than they had 3 weeks ago, when she had first choked them out in the darkness of her chambers, terrified of what they meant. I love you so much it scares me. I love you too. He kissed her softly, reverently. Now come. Our people are waiting. The ceremony was held in the great hall, the same room where Kyle had declared her his mate before the entire court. But today it had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, winter flowers cascaded from the rafters, and hundreds of guests filled the space, all of them rising to their feet as Ilara entered on Kyle's arm. She kept her chin high and her spine straight, just as he had taught her. She was no longer the broken Omega who had been thrown out into the snow to die. She was Ilara, queen of the Northern Territories, mate of the Lycan king. And she would make them all see it. The ceremony itself was a blur of ancient words and sacred vows. Kale's voice was steady as he pledged himself to her. His life, his kingdom, his eternal devotion. And when it was her turn, Ilara spoke the words with a clarity that surprised even herself. I was born with nothing, she said, her voice carrying through the hall. I was raised to believe I was worthless. For 22 years I lived in darkness, convinced that I would never deserve kindness, never deserve love. She turned to face Kyle, her eyes shining. And then you found me. You showed me that everything I had been taught was a lie. You saw treasure where everyone else saw trash. You gave me a home when I had never had one. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what it felt like. She reached up and touched his scarred face. I pledge myself to you, Kale. Not because you are a king, but because you are the man who knelt beside my bed and held my hand through my nightmares. The man who waited for me to choose him, even though he could have demanded anything he wanted. The man who taught me that I was worth fighting for. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow still reached every corner of the room. I am yours, forever. Kyle's eyes glistened with something she had never seen before. Tears. The fearsome Lycan king, conqueror of armies, was crying. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and the hall erupted into cheers. That night, in the warmth of their chambers, they completed the mate bond. It was everything Ilara had been afraid of, and nothing like she had expected. Kyle was patient, tender, worshipful, treating her body like something sacred, asking permission for every touch, every kiss, every whispered word. And when they finally came together, she felt something click into place inside her chest, a connection deeper than words, a bond that could never be broken. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. What are you thinking about? He murmured into her hair. The snow, she said softly. That night. If you hadn't opened that door? But I did. His arms tightened around her. And I would do it again. 1,000 times. 1,000,000 times. Whatever it took to find you. She smiled against his skin. I think I would have found you too. Eventually. Somehow. I don't doubt it. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Ilara. For the first time in her life, she believed it. 6 months later, word reached the castle that Alpha Blackwood's pack had fallen into ruin. Without Ilara to torment, without a convenient target for his cruelty, Blackwood had turned his rage on his own people. One by one, they had abandoned him, fleeing to neighboring territories, seeking refuge anywhere that would take them. His warriors had deserted. His allies had withdrawn their support. And when the end finally came, Blackwood had been found alone in his empty hall, raving about the Omega who had destroyed him. He died the way he had lived, bitter, alone, and convinced that everyone else was to blame for his misery. When Kyle told her the news, Ilara felt nothing but a quiet sense of closure. Does it bring you peace? He asked, watching her carefully. She considered the question. No, she said finally. But it doesn't bring me pain either. He's just gone. He can't hurt anyone anymore. Kale nodded slowly. The best revenge is simply living well. Yes. She smiled and leaned into his embrace. It is. 2 years later, Ilara stood on the balcony of the castle, watching the snow fall over the northern mountains. The cold didn't frighten her anymore. It was simply part of her home. Beautiful, quiet, peaceful. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Kyle's warmth. The council meeting ran long, he murmured against her ear. I missed you. You saw me 3 hours ago. Too long. She laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded. She laughed often now. It still surprised her sometimes, the sound of her own joy. I have news, she said softly. Good news? She turned in his arms and took his hand, pressing it flat against her stomach. The best news. Kyle's eyes widened. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to overwhelming, radiant joy. You're… yes. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you, he said fiercely. I love you. I love you. Ilara closed her eyes and held him just as tightly. She had been born an Omega, the lowest rank, worth nothing. And now she was a queen, a mate, a mother-to-be, loved beyond measure, cherished beyond words. The girl who had been locked outside in the snow had found her way home at last. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of fate, love, and happily ever after.